Hello, my name is Dan Richard. Welcome to the Promotion and Tenure Panel. Today on the panel we have several guests who will speak about promotion and tenure at UNF. We have Pam Chally, Interim Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. We also have Dominic Goose, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology and also chair of the University and Promotion and Tenure Committee. We have Erin White, who is an associate professor in public health, and Adil El Safti, who is a professor in civil engineering, and Radha Piatti, who is a professor in chemistry and also president of the Faculty Association. We'll have a question and answer session at the end after we hear from our panelists. We have plenty of time for that, and so I'll be Oprah or Ricky Lake or Maury Povich or whatever your generation is. I'll be kind of going around and having you speak your questions into the microphone. It's helpful if you do that, if you do speak into the microphone, both for your colleagues around the room to hear you, but also we're picking it up on the camera so that we can get it recorded for those faculty who are not able to be here today but really are interested in this and want to hear it. So without further ado, we'll turn things over to Dr. Chally.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and to talk about the joys and concerns, I guess you might say, of promotion and tenure. You know, here at this university, I've approached promotion and tenure as a candidate, as a dean, and now in the interim provost role. I never was a chair at this university, so I'm really glad we have Radha here who can answer the chair questions. There's a few things that I wanted to tell you about before we really get into the meat of what these individuals can share with you. The first thing I wanted to do was to let you know about how promotion and tenure went here at UNF this year. So in terms of tenure and promotion to an associate professor, the university committee recommended 13 people to be promoted, and there were 2 negative votes. It was not easy for me to do this, but I decided to recommend 15 of the 15, so I did recommend 2 that the university committee had some questions about. In terms of promotion to professor, this one, it honestly is a little bit more confusing because individuals withdrew. But originally there were 8 that were positive and 3 that were negative. One of the individuals who was recommended negatively withdrew, so what I did was recommend 7 positively, not 8 because 1 withdrew, and then 2 were not promoted to full professor. In terms of promotion to associate university librarian, there was 1 candidate who went up. That candidate does not go through the university committee, but that candidate was approved for promotion to associate university librarian. And then in terms of promotion to associate instructor or lecturer, there were 20 individuals that were recommended positively by the university committee, and I also recommended that those 20 individuals be promoted to associate instructor or lecturer. So I don't know if there's any questions about that, but that's how it fell this particular year. I thought what I'd like to do is just give an overview about promotion and tenure from my perspective. This will be somewhat brief, and I know there'll probably be a lot of questions after everyone else gets done speaking. But one of the things that I think is tremendously important is to work on tenure and promotion very, very early in the process. So by that, I mean, I think it's incredibly important that you talk with your chair early on in terms of what the expectation is. What are the rules? What are you supposed to be doing to be successful here and to be promoted, tenured, and then subsequently be promoted as a full professor? You know, here at UNF, teaching is tremendously important. And we pride ourselves on teaching. And you know, the truth of the matter is, the expectation is that you better be a good teacher. And if you're not, you need to figure out a way to become a good teacher. Because what a shame that would be a stumbling block. I think that there are many resources that are available to you to learn how to be a better teacher. If your evaluations aren't quite like you want them to be, certainly some of the work that Dan Richard and his group do, those are very positive ways that you can get some real good tips about how to be a better teacher. But I hope you hear what I said. I mean, we just expect that you're going to be a good teacher. And if early on you find out, hey, I'm really struggling with ISQs, or I'm really struggling with some of the comments that students are saying about me, it's something that you need to take incredibly seriously and get with some people to help you. I mean, we all want our students to receive the very, very best instruction that you possibly can receive. In terms of scholarship, you know, things that are important are research grants and published peer-reviewed work. You know, I encourage collaboration. I think that's a really smart way to grow the number of publications that you might be able to generate. Collaborate both inside and outside of the department. I encourage you to use the resources, again, that are available to you, sponsored research, or other workshops that we might offer here. But, you know, the way that I think about it is, so at UNF, 75% of your time is allocated to teaching. We all know that. I'm not sure if you've ever really tried to look at how many hours you spend a day and determine if indeed, it shouldn't be over a day, it really should be at least over a week or maybe even over a month. Do I really spend 75% of my time on teaching? Maybe the first few years you spend more time on teaching. I would think that you would, to get your classes down pat and to make sure that you're doing the very, very best that you can for your students. But I think it's also realistic to realize that after a while, if you're teaching multiple courses, multiple sections in the same course, if you've taught courses over and over, that maybe you don't have to spend 75% of your time on teaching. Now, I want you all to hear this. I'm not saying not to be a good teacher. I'm not saying not to put time and energy into teaching. All of you know I come from health, and let me tell you, in health things change. You can't, I can't tell people, my area used to be maternal child. I can't talk about NICU babies today the way that I talked about them in 2000, because things have changed so very much. So please hear me. I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be up to date and put your best foot forward in terms of teaching. But when I've talked to faculty, what I've heard them say is that sometimes teaching maybe even get rewards more quickly from teaching. And so I've talked to faculty who prefer to spend time revising and revising and revising courses over and over, and then aren't able to get to their research. That's really the point that I'm trying to say. So, you know, do what is important to do to be an excellent teacher, but then that leftover time that you have, devote it to research. Definitely devote it to research. Service. Hey, service is important here at UNF. I know that you all know this. And this is my suggestion. Do your fair share of service and put a smile on your face. It doesn't matter if it's service in your program, in your department, in your college, in the university, in the community, but do your fair share and follow through with the service that you're assigned. So that's really what I wanted to say as a brief overview. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Guess.
Yeah, thank you. When Dr. Richard asked me to come to this panel, and he asked the question, what are the relevant qualities of an application for the University P&T committee, I right away sent an email to the P&T committee and said, I will be on this panel, so what would you like to say? And that was very helpful. Of these 11 faculty who were on the P&T committee, probably 8 responded and had many good suggestions. So the summary that I will give now is not only my idea, but also includes their suggestions. So the brief answer is, what are we looking for is what is written in the contract: excellence in teaching, excellence in research, and continued meaningful service. That's it. That's the short answer. The long answer is, what does it mean, excellence in teaching, excellence in research, and continued meaningful service? So I will just go through a few bullet points. What does it mean, excellence in teaching? Yes, the ISQs are important, but it is okay to struggle in the first 1 or 2 years. We come from PhD institutions. It's the first time we teach classes, so it makes sense and it's understandable that we have some difficulties at the beginning, but it is important to show that we progress, that we make improvements, that we change over the first years. Of course, the evaluations are not everything. It is important how many classes, how many different classes have we taught? What kind of classes have we taught? Have we mentored students for thesis? Have we included students in our research? Have we mentored them when they went to conferences and presented research? Have we developed a study abroad program, for example? Okay, and sorry. And then I would encourage colleagues to come to my class. I would encourage the chair. Can you come one day? Can you look how I'm teaching? Can you give me some feedback? That also helps to improve our teaching. Then regarding excellence in research, what we saw is helpful is if the department has developed guidelines, because many departments are different and have different expectations. So we follow, of course, in the university committee, the guidelines from the department. But it is important over the first 5 years to develop an independent research profile. What does it mean? For example, not to always co-author with my former mentor. I have to write my own articles. And it would be good to be first author or last author, it depends on the discipline, on the publications. You have your dossier to explain your research, and you have your dossier to explain what authorship means in your discipline. Quantity and quality of peer-reviewed publications count. So it is good to have, for example, 5 decent articles and 2 excellent articles. It is good to dedicate some more time for articles in very good journals. And in your dossier, you might want to talk about impact factors, rejection rates, Schemago journal rank, Cabell's journal ranks. There are many data out there, but you want to make a point, what do my articles mean? What do the journals mean? How meaningful are they? Very important, what came up several times, do not publish in predatory journals. Every year we have candidates who publish in predatory journals. it would be good for chairs to mentor junior faculty right away. And be careful, there are many journals out there. You will get endless emails, publish in this and that journal, but ask your chair, ask your colleagues, is that a good journal? Should I publish in that journal? There has been the Beals list for predatory open access journals. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. I heard that he received some death threats. Some journals are very concerned. But, and he probably cannot even update that list because every day there are new journals out there. Book chapters are okay, but not regarded as highly because oftentimes the peer review is not as rigorous as it is for articles. Again, you have to make a point, and you can say, I published in Oxford University Press, this is a special book, etc., etc. Presentations are okay, but I myself made the mistake to have 8 presentations in the first year, and I would, in retrospect, rather focus more on writing articles than going from conference to conference. Authorship matters, I said that, and again, it depends on your discipline, but discuss it in your dossier. External grants, as we heard Provost Chally, matter a lot. I mean, they speak for themselves. If you get an external grant, you compete on the national level, and that's very powerful. One note to external letters. Please don't invite friends from a conference. Please don't invite your former mentor. Please don't invite another assistant professor to write a letter for you. All of that happened. And so try to look for names in your field, send a list to your chair. You want somebody to talk about your scholarship. And again, a comment for the chairs. Please, when you contact those people, provide a context. Via UNF, the regular teaching load is 3 classes a semester, and we are not an R1 institution. On the other hand, we often read in these external letters that the reviewers are very impressed with the research that happens here at UNF. I would say probably 60% of the dossiers that we see would pass at R2 institutions. The external letters say that. It's not me who says that. But that's impressive to see that most of our faculty are outstanding. Good. And then continued meaningful service. Participate in the department, participate in the college on a university level, and in the scientific community or the local community. Again, it depends on your area, but there are many ways to contribute. I could go on and on, but I stop now.
Okay. Hello, I'm Erin White. I'm an associate professor from the Department of Public Health. So I was taking some notes because I'm also going to be submitting my dossier for full professor. So I'm speaking mostly to those of you that are going up for tenure and promotion associate professor. So as Pam said, teaching at UNF is important. Many of us came from Research 1 institutions, and maybe that was not the culture where we came from, but at UNF it really, really is important. So a few things, I just kind of wanted to give some tips, and this is especially helpful to think about if you're just starting out or if you're getting close to submitting your dossier. ISQs are really important, but they're not the only thing that are important. But it's important for you to have a high response rates for your ISQs, to send emails to your students or ask your students, please complete this, tell them that it's important, empower them to complete those. You want those numbers to mean something for you. The overall rating of the instructor, that one question on there, it seems kind of silly, but that is really important. So that number is something that you'll find that you're reporting, and it may be something that reviewers are drawn to. So that number is important. So response rates and just kind of empowering your students to complete that. Okay, and the second point I really wanted to talk about was you sort of, how you can communicate the excellence in your teaching. So how do you show or demonstrate excellence? Basically what you'll be doing is, as probably all of you know, is you'll be writing a narrative statement, where that will be your opportunity to basically write a paper 5 to 10 pages. I don't know really what the normal length is, but where you will have the opportunity to say, this is how I'm demonstrating excellence. So 3 points related to that. The first point is have a teaching philosophy, okay? So have one. And if you don't have one now, then develop one. So really just asking yourself questions like, what is important for students to learn? What do you value? What do you want to contribute? What are your teaching goals? And just some things, is it professional identity? Is it critical thinking? Is it community engagement? Like, what are those things that you're valuing or that you're trying to instill in your students? The second point is, so first is kind of reflecting and thinking about that and really developing that. The second part is using that. So to not only say, this is what I value, what I'm trying to accomplish, but really doing it in your classroom, whether it's online or in person or whatever. So implement your philosophy and your goals into your course. And ways to implement that would be things such as assignments, projects, approaches that you're using with your students, just some way to where you're basically trying to meet your goal. And then the third part, it kind of all relates. It's, knowing your philosophy, implementing your philosophy, and then evaluating your teaching philosophy. So how did you do? So having some piece in your narrative that basically says, this is my goal, this is how I tried to achieve that, and this is how I did. So you can build in assessments and surveys, you can use grades, participation rates, perhaps, on certain things. You could even look at your ISQ, maybe specific items on your ISQ that are related to your teaching goals. You could also use peer evaluations, so some things like that. Let's see. Oh, this is just one little PS comment about the philosophy, about developing the philosophy. I think that's probably the most important thing is, really thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and working from there. I know, to me, I think it is helpful also to show if you have been at UNF for several years and you're talking about your teaching and you're talking about your philosophy, to kind of show growth in that. Sort of what you started out, how you've learned, how you've continued to grow as a teacher. So I think that that's important. There's some other advice. I also reached out to full professors in the Brooks College of Health and asked them just for some additional advice, and they stress the same kind of things that we just heard. Basically, your ISQs are super important, but they're not the only thing that are important. Getting, peer evaluations or your chair to come in to evaluate you are really valuable things that can show, that's additional evidence to show your excellence in the classroom. Also, perhaps consider implementing a midway evaluation in your course. So you have the ISQ, that's something that happens at the end, but if you created a survey, for example, where you're basically doing a process evaluation on how well your course is going, that gives you some additional data. In addition, it can help you adjust midway. Of course, everything that the Office of Faculty Enhancement offers, all of the training and learning opportunities can help us tremendously as a teacher. Awards was also mentioned. If you have teaching awards, definitely highlight that. That is an amazing thing. If you have the community involved in your work, so any kind of bringing the community in, that's a major strength and something you'd want to highlight. If you've conducted any workshops, if you have even any publications, perhaps, on teaching or strategies related to that, that may be helpful. Study abroad was mentioned, mentoring. Those are all things that would be important for you to definitely highlight.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Adel El Safti from Civil Engineering. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I feel so much pressure after hearing these articulate colleagues. I mean, they are so articulate, and it's really hard for me to even rise up to this level, and my provost as well. But I'll do my best. The first question that is being listed here is, what does it mean to be excellent in research and scholarly activities? So I think that the key point for excellence in research is to show excellence in the line of inquiry, basically the ongoing research agenda. and be innovative, kind of like independent study, or rather independent research that you can conduct. The problem that we're having is that in every department, there are certain factors and criteria that are different from others, like chemistry is different than physics and engineering. So I remember I have been working at 5 different universities in the last 25 years, UCF, FSU, North Carolina State University in Canada, and here. And is different here. Yes, it's primarily a teaching institution, but there is an emphasis on research. And teaching load increased to 3 and 3 like everybody else, but it was not the case when I joined 12 years ago. So there was a challenge. Other challenge that I might just add is that sometimes you don't have a lab facility, you don't have a startup package and the teaching load and all this stuff, but we were lucky enough with the support of faculty and administration to conduct some research. So I think the key issue is get this ongoing research and collaborate. So I came up with this because I thought that it might help to have this kind of slides, if you wish, to establish a sustained program. And let me click on the next one. This is the slide that I think that you can demonstrate your ability to conduct research by saying that publish as many journal publications, peer-reviewed journals as you can. But in some cases, conference papers are really great, especially in engineering, because we have this kind of evolving engineering discipline that's changing like overnight. I mean, so things have to be documented, have to be presented right away. I cannot wait for a year and a half or 2 years to present it. So you go there and present it and take the heat from all the audience. I remember when I go to the American Conclave Institute and just present something, it is really brutal to defend my presentation and just to show them some work. And I got lucky later on that they appointed me as academic council chair for the pre-stressed conclave institution. So it pays off later on. So I would say that peer-reviewed and check with the chair how many are acceptable. So I think that in chemistry is different than physics and engineering, how many are acceptable papers that you can have. And list in your dossier that are you the corresponding author or co-corresponding author or not. The citations and the impact of that journal is really important as well. So that is the first point that you see right there, which is demonstrate independent research and line of inquiry. The second one is demonstrate the record of disseminating your work as far as conferences, I mentioned earlier. And a third one, which is important as well, show basically a strong ongoing research program that you are seeking funds. It is really hard. In some departments, I believe, like construction management, they do not require that you get funds, even in engineering at the beginning, but you really need to show that you're trying to pursue fund and able to secure some funds. So I was lucky enough to secure over $2.5 million in the last few years as far as research, pure luck by collaboration with other institutions and the support of our colleagues and administration. So this is something that you need to show that you are pursuing that. And then if you cannot publish enough, if you cannot secure funds, at least show the fourth item, which is demonstrate undergraduate research, which is exactly essential in our institution. Since you are teaching to undergraduate students primarily, you will be able to get something out of it. Collaboration, I might add it to this list. I have been collaborated with 8 different universities from Louisiana State University, North Carolina, and Drexel and others. I think this is a key since we do not have a PhD program in our discipline, and we didn't even have a master's 7-8 years ago. So I had to collaborate with other universities in order for me to publish, to have doctoral students or postdoc collaborating with us. And we were able to get that. So I think collaboration is a key point as well. Also, something else, how can I integrate this research in my teaching? I think this is essential as well, that you reflect whatever you're doing. Like, for instance, I'm working on innovative materials, fiber-reinforced polymers. I integrated that in my structures courses, which is really a wide stretch, like it's really strange, but the students loved it. And the questions that I'm getting from them helped me to enhance even my research. So I went to the National Science Foundation. I'm partnering with Louisiana State University in a project about structural health monitoring. It helped me to inject this part in the scope of work. So I believe this is something really good. The publications, I know it's changing from one to another. I published over 88 journal and conference papers, but when I applied for promotion, it was only 25. For professor, it was 50, but I got lucky. I mean, not everyone is lucky, but I struggled at the beginning, but I got lucky afterwards with the collaboration of my colleagues. If you can publish a book, I publish a book in statics. I mean, if you can publish a book or a chapter as well, that would be great. Emphasize that and highlight it as well. And if you can get any awards. So the second part, which is what are the essential qualities of a candidate for full professor that distinguish you from an associate professor? I believe that I highlighted some. If you can show some sort of authority, some sort of capacity in your work, in your creative work, some sort of leadership, that you are significant, irreplaceable, I feel, as far as that discipline. Significant recognitions. For instance, I was humbled by getting this award, the Educator of the Year Award in 2015 by the Pre-Stress Concrete Institution. That's a national award, and that definitely will help any of us, and any of us can pursue something like that in his or her discipline. This is something that shows that you are well recognized nationally and internationally. Another thing is that I was lucky enough to also be a Fulbright Scholar, so I spent 6 months in Italy and Dubai as a Fulbright Scholar, and I'm going next month to Canada as a Fulbright Specialist. I think that will add also to your dossier that you are trying to demonstrate your excellence in research and collaborate with others. And these are attainable, I believe, that you can get. Other thing is that, what is the impact of our research? So I highlight in my dossier that the project that I got, the $2.5 million with the Department of Transportation, National Science Foundations, and other, is having an impact. So the outcome of my research changed the code. So the code itself for designing of bridges, which is really useful to talk about it now after this unfortunate incidents at FIU, that we changed the design of our bridges in a way, and that was something that you can see here, that we changed the cracking and the sealing of the cracking bridges. The next slide is changing the structural design guidelines. That is from the second project that I'm having. And here introduce innovative materials like fibers, glass, carbon, basalt, and others, and the structural health monitoring, which is a buzzword. I'm sure that you can relate to that in your own discipline, something really magnificent that you can say, I'm working on that, I'm collaborating with other universities in that. I've done such a thing with the undergraduate students or graduate students. And if you are not able to get graduate students, you can collaborate with other institutions. This is another example for it. The undergraduate research. I think that is vital for someone who's going for either associate, but more importantly for full professor, that they show that they are really immersed in this experience of students, that they can do lab work with them, that they can highlight and show that they are the authority in that discipline, that they can conduct work, that they can go to the field, get the students with them, and try to enhance the research that they are doing. And don't shy away from TV interviews like the Matthews Bridge collapse that we had a few years ago. I had like 15 interviews with the TV. I was so hesitant, and my colleague said, do not even dare to go to the TV station. If you say something bad with your heavy accent, it will be embarrassing. I mean, they told me that. I just didn't care. I went there, it was great, and we developed an animation for that bridge and the vessel that hit the Matthews Bridge. And later on, I made a project as a research project for undergraduate to develop an animation for this and what is the structural system. And we are in the process of doing the same thing with the FIU bridge that collapsed. So this is another thing that we're talking. So show your capacity as a professor and how you are leader in your profession. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm the last panelist. Is it on? Okay, is this thing on? Okay. I'm Radha Piatti of the Department of Chemistry, and the thing I was asked to speak with you about is service, so I'll just say a few short words about that. I think Provost Chally has already mentioned that it's good to do your fair share and not to let it sort of take over, and I would agree with that. I would say particularly before tenure to sort of keep it low. It's never a deal breaker in promotion and tenure, and no amount of awesome service ever overcomes weakness in scholarship and teaching. So keep that in mind when you make your strategic choices about what you do. I think continuous and meaningful service can mean simply dependable participation in what you do. I think many candidates who come up for tenure have a mix that's right for them of department, college, university, and professional service. I think sometimes the department service is important because it shows the colleagues that are closest to your tenure decision how you've contributed to shouldering the load in your unit, which is the smallest unit that will evaluate you compared with the university P&T, et cetera. I think the professional piece, the professional service shows that your professional opinion is valued in what you do, particularly in things related to your professional society, to your discipline and your sub-discipline, and in reviewing for journals. I think when you review journal articles, sometimes that can be a heavy burden, and they start asking you too much, and then you start to say, no, I can't do this much. But it shows that you're dependable and that your opinion's valued, and sometimes that's a really strong statement, particularly before tenure. So then the second question I'm asked here is, what advice would you provide to tenure track faculty about balancing service with other responsibilities? And an important part of that is just kind of keeping it low and doing what you need to do to shoulder the load. What I'm going to tell you now are a bunch of ors. They're not ands. They're about selecting what's strategically most important to you and only doing those things that are strategically most important to you, not all of these things. So the first one I would say is to do service that helps your department in its critical path. There are always essential things that a department has to do to move forward, and I think when you do that, you do things like search committees and curriculum committees. That's the meat and potatoes of your department, and when you're doing that, you know the key issues, your colleagues know that you know the key issues, and your chair knows that too, that you're addressing them and that you're carrying the load for those. And so that's possibly the right strategic decision for you in your service. Another service I would ask you to consider is to serve on committees at the university where you meet folks from departments and colleges that you don't know. It's always good to have a few people that know you that are perhaps on the university P&T committee or that are elsewhere in the college that you're in. And so just getting to know more people across campus, service can be a vehicle for that as well. Another point I would make about service is that when you can be asked to do a lot of things, and of course the word no should be your friend, but the kind of service that advances your own interests is often the best kind of service to do. Whether your most strategic or closely held to your heart interest is scholarship, or is teaching, or is diversity, or is a student issue, moving your professional agenda forward can be done to some extent through your service. I guess to back up for a second, I'm sure all of you have thought of the question of what do I want to do in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And the lion's share of that is through scholarship and teaching. But to the extent that your service can serve what you want to be doing in 5 or 10 years, the strategic selection of what you want to do in service is part of that too, and preparing you and educating you about those key issues. And then the last thing when I talk about key interests, I listed research, teaching, diversity, student issues. These can also be your key professional interests in your discipline and sub-discipline where you want to advance a particular strain of research, and that's the place you should strategically choose to do your service. And then the last thing I would say is related to my telling you that no should be your favorite word, which is that sometimes when you're asked to do service, it's good to be prepared to ask your chair to make trades. So when your chair needs something from you, you're prepared to say, I need to think about that for a couple of days, and when she or he comes back, you tell them, I'd like to not do this one if you want me to do what you just asked. And so most chairs, some chairs, are receptive to that kind of thing where there's only a certain amount of service an untenured person really should do to make successful progress, and if you're being told you're really important, I need you in this seat, there's got to be something that you can come out of. And so be prepared to do that in a collegial manner as needed. And so that's all I would say about that. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, panelists. I appreciate your thoughts and insights. So we'll go into a question and answer period now. I'm sure many of you have some questions on your mind from some of the things you heard, or maybe things you've heard from your colleagues that you want to kind of clarify. This is a time to get those questions answered, and I'll just come by and again, we'll be sure to capture those on the microphone. Questions? Yes.
So several of you mentioned developing an independent line of research and also mentioned being collaborative. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the balance of those aspects of research.
There is Yeah. From my understanding, my humble understanding, you can create that line of inquiry and genuine kind of independent research that you're having, take the lead on that, and then collaborate with others. For instance, in my projects, I wanted to do characterization of fibers. I tried here at the institutions, and the faculty were so receptive, and they helped me in physics department, chemistry department, but they were busy. So I collaborated with Louisiana State University. I collaborated with Drexel University, that they have lab facilities there, and they added their name to our project. So we do some sort of collaboration. What did I gain out of it? Their lab facility, their PhD students, a postdoc that's working there. But I am taking the lead in that project, learning along the way and implementing what I learned 25 years ago in Canada in my research. So yes, you can have an independent research, but you can collaborate with others. The issue of collaboration, the dean of graduate school is encouraging, John Kentner, he's encouraging that heavily. John is saying that just go ahead and do that. Others might have a different opinion about it, but I feel like it is significant. Without this collaboration, I wouldn't have even gone into this NSF arena. I submitted 4 proposals, they're all declined to National Science Foundation for the last 12 years. Till I partnered with Louisiana State University, then we've started having success. So it can bear fruit to collaborate with others. So I don't see a very like exact line between the two. You can do both. If you'd like to add something to it, do you think? Oh, I thought that you wanted to.
No, I'll just say briefly that while a lot of important scholarly questions are answered in collaborative groups, faculty are still evaluated as individuals. And so when you describe your scholarly agenda in your narrative, it's important to explain what is the important scholarly question that you and the team were trying to answer together. And it's good to collaborate, because sometimes you need all those pieces to answer the right question. But it's incumbent on any candidate to write a narrative that shows what their contribution was and what their trajectory was, because tenure is not just about individual projects, but sometimes it's about a trajectory or an agenda. And so in the collaborative projects you've done, not you, but a candidate has to be able to describe their contribution to each of these projects and how it fits into their individual trajectory, because again, that's how all faculty are evaluated.
Yeah, if I may add briefly, if you submit your vita and you have 6 articles and you're always author number 4 of every paper with 6 authors, it doesn't look good. It would be good if there are 1, 2, 3 pieces that show you are the lead author, you are the responsible person who conducted that study.
Other questions?
I'd be, excuse me, I'd be curious in the panelists' comments, maybe Dominic and Pam in particular, about any differences or changes or how you feel about the recent switch to the electronic online dossier process. How's that changed?
Oh, I have one attached. I forgot. So in my old job, I used to carry all those notebooks home. And granted, it was a smaller number than I had the opportunity to review this year. Although, and honestly, carrying those things home was ridiculous. And I just didn't have time. So I really valued that it was online. There were a few hiccups in it. And I'm really glad I didn't wait till the last minute to review them. It was really quite simple for even somebody like me. But I'm so glad I didn't wait till the last minute, because the first time I opened it up, I needed some additional help. I think it would be, so I feel real positive about it. Yes, few hiccups, but I think we're committed. to correcting some of the issues that were problematic. You know what I would be so interested in addition to your thoughts about it too, but individuals who use the system and what it was like to use the system, because I did not put my materials in.
I think Gordon asked a survey of those who, in the P&T committee, who worked with it, and probably he's working on the data analysis of the survey. But from our view, it worked pretty well. It was the first year that it was online, and we expected certain problems, but it worked pretty well. But one issue that has to be clear for chairs and candidates, when there are certain deadlines to submit a dossier, then please stick to the deadlines and that's it. It shouldn't happen like it happened in one case, that someone updated files, added materials to it. That's not allowed according to the contract. So chairs have to watch out for that and be aware of that, and candidates as well. A deadline is a deadline, and by a certain deadline, files have to be uploaded.
And there's no way to play around with that when it's online like this, because the date and time is documented, so.
I had a question about selecting external reviewers. I've heard mixed messages in terms of you should select people from peer institutions, or you should select people from who are the top in your field. What is your take on who we should be considering?
I'm happy to start with that, and then certainly would value other people's response. I think it's really important that you pick someone from an institution that's like us, preferably a little better or way better. Where you can get in trouble in terms of individuals trying to evaluate the impact of the letter is if you receive letters from individuals who are at institutions that are not as good as UNF, or are not an academic institution. There has been an example where I've reviewed some letters that were not from a university or a college. I guess if I were thinking about it, I'd be really interested in that peer aspirant list that we have. It's posted on the web. That may be a good place to start to think about institutions that you would like to look for individuals who might be able to write some letters. And it's certainly perfectly fine to ask your colleagues at Harvard or Oxford or wherever you might like.
And I would recommend searching for possible reviewers who do research in a similar field.
Certainly.
So they will read some of your articles, and if they are from the same field, they can read the articles with a different eye and they can comment in a different way. Even reviewers from R1 or R2 institutions, if they get a good introductory email of the chair describing what UNF is, they are pretty good at seeing and understanding our situation and commenting and taking this into consideration.
I have a question. What can the administration do for departments that don't want to put together the tenure guidelines for their department? So like in our department, every time there's a retirement, our standards change without standards actually changing and nobody being notified of what they are. I'm on the tenure committee and I have no idea what our standards are because nobody wants to put that forward.
So what happens when you don't have those is the default is the contract.
Right.
And that's what happens. And I guess I've learned, especially this year, in this position, having those guidelines is really helpful.
Right. Well, the contract says it would be unfair for a candidate to not know, so that's kind of a...
What department are you in? No.
Yeah.
I'd try and put them together. And you know what? At the very least, I'd start off by putting research together.
Right.
Because that's where the biggest questions come from.
Okay, I have a follow-up question about the external letters. Let's see if, do you guys want us to get the letters from someone really we don't know, but they are experts in the field? So for example, reaching out someone I have never interacted, or someone who I have interaction but never published together or presented together. But someone we're totally new.
I think it's almost safer or better if you don't know the person. I mean, many are transparent and say, I have met the person once or twice at a conference, we have chatted, but we have never collaborated, that's it. But if it's obvious that you have been at the same institution before, it becomes fishy.
Being in the field, being active, not knowing the person, it depends on how we define. But I think I can certainly reach out to people who doesn't publish or present it together. But I also feel like, if I don't know the person professionally, that's also one of my, lack of professional engagement.
So, I'm sure many people around this room have been asked to write similar letters. And most of the time, I do not know the people. And I feel it is a service to my profession and a service to write those letters. Individuals have the option to say, I'm really sorry I can't do it at this time. But to Dominic's point, when you're getting letters from someone who knows you, it puts a different color on how objective the letter actually is. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask individuals that you don't know.
To continue on the external reviewers, you mentioned to choose external reviewers from institutions at or above our level. How do you view reviewers from national labs or NASA or NOAA? Those places are not academic places, but they do high amounts of research.
So I'm sure that might be a very, very appropriate level or letter. But the one thing I would say, and I'll turn it over to you, is make sure somehow it's clear who these individuals are. For like Noah, I'm not sure the typical faculty member in nursing would know. Just the same way if there was a nursing research organization, you wouldn't know exactly what that meant. So it would be really important that it's clear the reason that you ask someone like that to write a letter.
Also, the external letter question. I work in a very particular field, interpreter education, for a long time, and that field is very small. So the idea of finding somebody who doesn't know me, which is awesome to say, would be exponentially more difficult than someone who knows me. So even in my genre of work in that field, even smaller, I can almost count on my hands and toes the PhDs in my field practically. It's a very finite field. So for that instance, what do you recommend for external letters when we all, especially the nature of our work being international, are expected, back to that collaborative work piece, that we are expected to know one another in order to conduct our research, but also as far as practice and knowing one another.
Did you say your field is international?
Interpreter education.
Okay, so
spoken and sign language interpreter education.
Okay.
It's the practice of interpreting worldwide. Yeah.
because if it's international, I think it's okay to you have to have minimum 2 letters. It's okay to have someone from abroad too. They just have to comment on your research. Again, then perhaps you have to look to widen the circle and get an...
We do know each other worldwide, though. Like,
Worldwide?
Yes, we are that small.
I would probably widen the circle and try to at least get one objective person who doesn't know you.
If you do both academic and practitioner research, is it still inappropriate to have practitioners comment on your research?
I think I would say, perhaps I would have to look it up, but I think the letters should be from academia. There are many people who do research in the field, applied research, but they are still researchers. So I think you would find.
I would actually echo the same thing, which is that every external reviewer has to submit their vita along with their letter. So the committee can always see what their credentials are, whether they're from NOAA or from anywhere else. It's just that I think, honestly, very practically, the coin of the realm is letters from other academic people carry more weight than letters from practitioners, even if the practitioners have terminal degrees.
I think it's because we believe that individuals who are from academia really understand what tenure means. And I think that, and then promotion to full also. And I think that's why, at least in my mind, I pay more attention to the academics.
One of the concerns that I've heard in my department a number of times, and I think both of you, or several of you referenced this, is the difference between the expectations of publication in one field as opposed to another. That is, one field might have a large number of multi-author journal articles. Another field, the coin of the realm, is single-authored monographs, books, journal articles, and that sort of thing. And I was wondering if you had some comment that I could give back that helps my faculty feel comfortable with the way their scholarship is evaluated, given a committee that's made up of people who may not recognize that a book in history is a substantial accomplishment, even if they don't have 27 or 50 or 100.
I'm sorry, I wasn't bragging. I'm just sorry.
But I mean, it's a very different sort of measurement, and I was wondering how that process plays out within the context of the committee and ways that the chair, for example, can maybe help that to clarify some of those concerns.
I mean, the first thing is the dossier of the candidate, where you can make a point. In our discipline, this is the case. The second, we read the letters of the chairs, we read the letters of the department, we read the letters of the deans, and all of them have also the opportunity to say, religious studies, a book is gold, and we don't publish too many articles, for example. So we look at that, and we are aware that departments are different. We are aware that in music and in design and in psychology, you have to evaluate people differently.
If I may add something as far as the number of authors as well, I mean, maybe it's not very relevant to the question, but I do have, like other professors in engineering, 6 or 5 or 7 authors. And the nature of structural engineering, for instance, research is you're building a bridge, for instance, a full-scale bridge in Tallahassee, and you're conducting that. You will definitely have several faculty members from Florida State University across the street, from the research center and here. So I don't think that there is any less value having multiple authors. Absolutely, it shouldn't be the predominant number of publications that you have 6 or 7. But yes, a big portion of our publications will have a huge number of postdoc students and like 2 or 3 faculty members involved in that because of the scale of the work that we're doing in some disciplines. Even within the civil engineering program itself, we have several disciplines: environmental, coastal, geotech, structures, transportation. Every discipline or sub-discipline is different, and the number of authors can change significantly from one to another. So I value all, I think, from my point of view, my humble understanding of that.
Other questions? Yes.
Okay, it's about teaching part. And I don't think you guys really meant, but the way I took it sounds like ISQ is, one of the critical factors, if not the critical factors. So my question here, like me, who only teach and one, if not two, most like one, average 1.5 so far for my 3 years here, because being a program coordinator and the only person and developing new courses and new programs. So, and my teaching is quite limited. But there are other kinds of listed elements, significant change of curriculum, program development, other items. How would you, so I feel like I'm a little bit nervous about only looking at the ISQ when I have many other things related to teaching I'm doing. That's what I'm doing.
I think what you'd want to do is in your narrative where you're explaining your teaching excellence is make sure that you're highlighting all of those other efforts that you're doing, because those would be valued tremendously. So those are all important for teaching too. And I also think if you did have a lower ISQ, that you would want to explain that and sort of kind of put it in context and say, this is what happened, this is where I'm going from here, this is how I plan to further develop. And also just keeping in mind that you kind of communicate too that you're sort of purposeful teaching, that you have a philosophy, that you're implementing it, and that you're continually evaluating it, even if your ISQ was lower this time. This is the reason why, and this is how you're moving forward. But definitely those other things are really, really important for teaching and would be highlighted, and you want to make sure that that was kind of like a key feature pointed out.
Other questions?
I do a lot of graduate teaching. We're growing a graduate program. And often I don't have 7 graduate students in my class to get ISQs from. And I would like to think that they think I'm a good teacher. How can I get that into my dossier?
For that, I would think, so they do the ISQ, right? They don't do it?
Because of the new agreement, any class with 7 or less students in it is not, they don't even get invited for an ISQ.
I think maybe one thing you could do is informally collect that evaluation from the students. So you could even kind of create your own ISQ as a survey, share it with them, and ask them for their feedback, and just telling them that their feedback is really important to you, that you take it seriously, that you will share it with others, and just having some of that feedback that you could then report, annual evaluation, and then also in your narrative portion.
If I may add, that's perfect point, Erin, is that what I did earlier is that, or years ago, is invite my colleagues just to evaluate me, or Dan Richard to come and just give me critique for my teaching. It was horrible, at the beginning, and then all this feedback helped me in the last 25 years to enhance it and become good. So I think that you can get feedback from your colleagues, and from Dan, I think he'll give you a wonderful feedback. Maybe you can add that to your dossier.
So a piece of wisdom I've heard in the past is that the reason we rely so heavily on ISQs is because there aren't a lot of other outcome measures from the students to use. Faculty are very creative and innovative. They work very hard to put material in front of students and describe that in their dossiers and their tenure narratives. It's just that seeing kind of what the outcome was separate, not separate because it all comes from what the faculty put in, but seeing an outcome measure that's somewhat independent is, I think, the role that often the ISQ is just played by default. And there may be other ways of you're getting some kind of outcome from the student, whether that's your own teaching survey that you then show that you've improved what they've commented on, or some other kind of output measure, I think has some value in a dossier.
To follow up on that, Alyssa Barr and I did a webinar on other forms of evidence that can be used to describe your teaching, and video, we created a video from that webinar, and that is available on our YouTube page and on our website, and I can send everyone a link to that video, and it might give you some ideas about other strategies you could use for that.
I just have a couple of comments from the perspective of a chair. It is the job of the chair to provide the context for the letters in part of their evaluation. If there's any issue of where is this person from, hopefully the committee at the department level has also done that. So that's why you need to talk to the chair as he or she looks over the names that you've provided in terms of, is there any discussion about who that person is in relationship to, are they an academic, a research center, a professional association, something like that. The second thing is, I got to look at my notes, damn. That it's really important to understand the narrative in terms of you're writing it not necessarily for your own colleagues, but for a broader audience. And you've always got to keep that in mind, especially at the P&T, the first step in. Keep the narrative not full of jargon related to your own discipline, but is understandable at a broader level. And just the last point, having gone through as a chair the electronic portfolio, start now, create folders that are research, service, and teaching, and start putting stuff, the PDFs, in those folders. And by the way, keep a set off of your computer, either in Dropbox or something else. So if you have a catastrophe with your computer, you don't have to try and reconstruct all that, because that's your valuable evidence, your information. So luckily now, almost all articles are in some kind of PDF form. I've been around the block a few times, and that's not always the way it was. So keep your media straight. Any emails that say congratulations or thank you for some kind of service component, create a PDF out of that and store it, because you don't want to run around at the last minute to search for things. So I would just, as soon as you can on some Friday where you don't have to teach or you're not in a research engagement, start doing that sorting.
Good advice.
I had a late answer to a question from there where the department expectations are confusing or not very clear. One idea could be the third-year review that happens in most departments, where senior faculty evaluate a dossier of an untenured person in the third year and then give feedback and recommendations. That would help perhaps the person what to change and what direction to go. And another thing that I forgot, for those who go up for full professor, please be very transparent about what happened before getting tenure and when do I start commenting, this is all the material that I want to include and report for going up for full. We had cases where this was very confusing, and you want to be very transparent about that.
I just wanted to mention, at the end of your third year is really 4 years too late. When you accept your job offer, you should have an idea of what's expected of you. And the problem that we have is we tell people things, one thing when we hire them, a different thing at the third year review, and then I've seen different things on the tenure panel. So it depends on who's doing what. And that's the biggest problem that we have. But by the end of your third year, you're 4 years into a research stream.
You know, our intention is when you're hired and when you start here is that you'll be successful. And Oh, that sounds great and good. Okay, sure, Pam. But we don't ever bring anybody in that we don't believe would be successful. And I'm not quite sure why I felt compelled to say that at this moment. But I do become concerned when people indicate it's their belief that the requirements are changing. Perhaps we are getting a little more rigorous, but I don't know. Would you think there's been a huge difference in the last 10 years?
Just to clarify, I think the question really is about what is communicated to faculty. Not that the standards have changed necessarily, but what gets communicated to faculty might shift, depending on who's chair, depending on who you're talking to, which colleagues are on which committees. I think that was kind of more, did I reflect that properly?
As you have a committee of 5, if one person retires that had one view, now the balance of power can shift.
Okay. That's why it would be nice to get some guidelines for you.
So when going up for full professor, federal grants are multiple years, like 4 years, and you get it the last year as an assistant professor. Can you still count it towards full? Because the bulk of the work was accomplished as an associate professor, and I could talk about how this enabled me to do this research and this grant. So can you still talk about stuff that you accomplished as an assistant professor towards my trajectory?
Perhaps I would mention it, but you got it as an assistant professor, so your work continued and probably you have done much, much more. So again, I would be very transparent about it and say I got it when I was still assistant professor, but I continued working on it when I was associate.
The grant is the work. It's not getting the grant. The purpose of the grant is to do the work, right? And all of 3 out of the 4 years was done as an associate professor, right? The grant itself is not the interesting thing. What the grant enabled me to do is the interesting thing.
Well, the advantage will be you have an enormous output more than before because you had to write 2, 3, 4 grant proposals to get the grant, and now you have it, working 3, 4 years on it, so you have probably 6, 7 articles out of the grant. So, but getting the grant is the tough thing. I mean, rejection rates are sometimes 80, 90%, depending on if you apply to NSF or wherever you apply.
Okay, so there was a lot of focus on the importance of ISQs in assessing teaching, but we also know that there's mounting evidence that ISQs are systematically biased against certain groups. So I guess my question is two-part. How does the P&T, how at the university level, how are people accounting for that? And then should we as people coming up also address the big elephant in the room?
So I can't answer the question about how the P&T committee would perceive ISQs and bias related to that, but I would think if you're teaching a course, some courses may be lower ISQs, some content maybe whatever. I think whatever those specific situations are, you'd want to make that really clear in your narrative. And I will turn over the question about how to do that necessarily for the P&T committee.
Yeah. I would probably address it in the narrative when you talk about your teaching, why you think there's a certain bias regarding the ISQs. But again, my point is I see the ISQs as helping me to improve my teaching. So why is this ISQ low this year in this course? And then I think about it, and then I look at the student evaluations, and it led me to make these changes, and it helped me to improve. So I would include the ISQs in my narrative on the way to improving my teaching. Mm-hmm.
So if I can maybe rephrase a little bit, sometimes the conclusion from the evidence of your ISQs is that my students are biased. my students are bigots. They don't like to hear about race and diversity from an African American female, right? And so there's not much more, like I can't change the color of my skin, I can't change the fact that I'm a female. That's not an improvement that I can make. And so there's not much of a conclusion that I can draw from those ISQ results in those contexts. And the research supports that those things matter to students and it influences their rating. So, but there's nothing as a faculty member that I can do about those things. I don't know if I'm phrasing that properly, but right. So the research suggests that this is just a biased evaluation and I should ignore it. And so I'm wondering, have you gotten any narratives that address these kinds of issues, and how do the committee members respond to these issues when they are identified in the narrative?
Well, we read the narratives, and honestly, looking at my memory, I don't think that many people address them to such an extent as you have done now. But we see ISQs as one thing, as one indicator of teaching, and I'm tempted to say something.
Go ahead.
Almost nobody didn't get tenure promoted because of a low ISQ. I leave it at that.
Okay, so related to that question, there are other evidence of teaching effectiveness, including the peer and the chair and feedback. Then what if like my courses are all happen to be online? How can I do that?
You can enroll them in your course as an instructor, and it kind of you could give them guidelines and say, please go through this and comment on this, that, and the other. We have a peer evaluation form that our colleague that we share among each other, and I'd be happy. I mean, I don't know if everybody has that, but just giving that to somebody else and letting them go into your course, see your responses, just go all into that grade book and see everything that you're doing, and then they can comment. I mean, just as they can by coming to your course, a face-to-face course, they can come to your online course.
So that is not violation of Fulbright, it's okay?
That's
if they access our students' data?
They can just
somebody
be
else?
enrolled as a student, can't they? They don't.
But
have
I
to
would
be.
think that they would, maybe then they would just be enrolled as a student. But I would think that maybe a TA is a better, because you can enroll someone as a TA, a student, or an instructor. But I would think some of the feedback that you're giving to students and those dialogue back and forth, which are in the grade book, I would think those are valuable feedback, but I don't know.
Not being an expert on FERPA, and I would certainly defer to our legal team for those questions. But from my understanding of the guidelines, it would not be a violation of FERPA if the person was responsible for evaluating you as a teacher and the person is an employee of the university. Then they are operating in the scope of their responsibilities at the university to see this information. And so I would not invite someone who's not a member of the university or someone who does not have evaluation as part of their responsibility. I wouldn't invite someone to do that. But if it's part of their responsibility and they're just doing their job, it should not be a violation of FERPA. But certainly I'd kind of defer to our legal team to clarify any questions around that.
Can I ask a question about research? Okay, so I have a question about research. In the contract, going up to full, it says the candidate should have typically more research from associate to full compared to from blank to associate. So the question became, in our department, we started doing this counting game. So does that happen to where candidates really need to show, like if you were really productive for your pre-tenure, do you have to produce an exponential or some kind of more than before? Because it says typically. So I was just wondering how that's perceived at the university level.
We had a heated discussion about that topic in our committee. because the contract says something like you have to have more than what you had before going up for associate. So some interpreted, well, if you had 10 publications, if you have 13, that's more. Some people say you had 10, no, now you have to have 11. So we didn't really come to an agreement, and in most cases it doesn't really matter so much. But it wouldn't be fair if someone has 8 publications or 9 going up and now having 8 to say, you have not done much more than before.
Okay,
so we were not on such a level. But again, going up for full, you have to have a name in the field and you have demonstrated all the excellence.
Okay. This may be our last question, given the time.
As a follow-up to that, you have a fixed period of time going up to from assistant to associate, but a non-fixed period of time. So do you look at it on a per year basis or 10 versus 12, whether it's 6 years going up for full or 16 years going up for full?
That's a good question, and we didn't count, okay, this person has 15 publications in 20 years, or this person has 15 publications in 10 years. So we were nice towards the candidates. But Juliana might want to comment on that, or do you not want to comment?
Well, we're getting toward the end of our time. I appreciate our panelists for answering some really tough questions and giving us some guidance. Thank you all for coming, and please make sure you sign in if you haven't signed in, so that way any resources and materials we can send on to you through email. Thank you.